Several years ago, I went out to lunch with a few developers who were working on Crackdown 3 to get some advice about game development. We talked about a lot of things, but the thing that stuck with me the most was that one of the developers asked me what my least favorite game was. Not the worst, my least favorite game. They said how there's a lot you can learn from looking into why a game is your least favorite. You can see design missteps, think about how you'd handle something differently, learn what to avoid when making games, etc. My least favorite game was obvious to me, but when asking why it was my least favorite, it was kind of hard to pinpoint what exactly it was. Sure, I could point out a few things here and there, but this was a game loved by many, and I had such a contradicting opinion. It was so tough for me to figure out because my least favorite game of all time is Xenoblade Chronicles X. Alright, look, me and Xenoblade X have a very troubled relationship. While nowadays it's easily my least favorite game of all time, it didn't start out that way. Originally, it was the most hyped I've ever been for a game. Now that might sound like a dramatic shift, but oh boy there's a history here. To give full context, we need to go back to the fabled year of 2010 and talk about a little RPG for the Wii called The Last Story. I saw the announcement for The Last Story at a perfect time. I was just getting into JRPGs, and with the gorgeous graphics and flashy combat, this game looked like the coolest thing ever to my 11-year-old self. I wanted to play it so badly, and I couldn't wait for the English release date. But then in early 2011, I saw another RPG for the Wii that looked incredible. Pandora's Tower. Oh boy, I couldn't wait for this game. This is why I have depression. This eventually led to me discovering other Salty People, which eventually evolved into Operation Rainfall, a movement to get Nintendo of America to release those two games, alongside some other RPG, Xenoblade. I don't know, it looked alright, but I helped support it for the cause. Xenoblade came out first, and I got it day one just to help push for the games I actually cared about. But you know, I bought the game, I might as well check it out, could be decent. I never beat these two. Xenoblade blew my mind. I'd never played anything like it. The super intricate and huge world, the incredible story, the super deep combat system, the music, it quickly became one of my favorites of all time and still is to this day. This game was so good that it ignited my passion to be a game designer so that I could make something even half as good as this magnum opus of gaming. Xenoblade pretty much became my everything. So can you imagine how I felt when I saw this? I thought Xenoblade was god tier stuff, but this, oh, this was on a whole new level. Open world Xenoblade, graphics that don't look like a PS2 game, fucking flying mechs and that music, this is gonna be the greatest game of all time. It was not. Okay, so this is where I admittedly set my expectations way too high. I became obsessed with X, as it was called at the time. I would rewatch any little bit of footage or trailer that was drip-fed, and with each trailer, I just got more and more hyped for the messiah of gaming to finally descend upon the mortal plane. And god, when they revealed the title was Xenoblade Chronicles X, I think I reached nirvana. Anyone who knew me at the time knows that my personality was, I have an erection for Xenoblade X. My phone wallpaper was literally the release date of the game, so I could constantly remind myself that life isn't fair, but also how soon I could play it. After nearly 3 years of pain and suffering, December 4th finally hit, and I was in love. This was perfection. In the first weekend of owning it, I nearly played the game for 30 hours straight, only breaking for food. I am dead serious. But you know, as I kept playing more and more things kept pissing me off, like how awful the party system was or how obnoxious enemy sightlines were. But I kept trying to reason with those flaws, like finding excuses to explain away my frustrations to keep the image of this game being a masterpiece. But the issues and frustrations kept piling on. I kept desperately trying to love this game despite everything, but it was just breaking me. I miserably trudged through 100%ing this game in a desperate attempt to find joy in it, to find that magic that the first Xenoblade had. But after nearly 250 hours, after reaching 100% completion, I got nothing. I looked back at my entire time with this game and realized I had a miserable experience. It fully set into me that this wasn't the game I hoped for. This game literally put me through the 5 stages of grief. Look, I am fully aware there is no way Xenoblade X could have lived up to my incredibly unrealistic expectations. It could have been the greatest game of all time and I still would have been disappointed. But I just had so many problems with the game that it just exacerbated that disappointment. I fully understand that I have a major bias towards this game, but even then, disappointment is practically the theme of the problems I have with this game. When I first played this game, there were so many things that I thought were incredible, but I just absolutely hated and couldn't explain why. But now that I'm a big boy with a degree in video game design, I decided I wanted to give Xenoblade X a second chance. Like, yeah, I've hated it for the longest time, but I could try looking at it with a fresh perspective. Because maybe I just gaslit myself into thinking the game was far worse than it was out of disappointment. I'm sure I can fully enjoy this game for what it has to offer. I just like this game even more. Xenoblade X absolutely baffles me. This game conceptually should be something I love. I love everything the director Tetsuya Takahashi touches. I love RPGs. I love open world games. I love freeform exploration. I love mechs. But if you couldn't tell by the length of this video, I have a problem with nearly everything this game has to offer. No game has ever left me feeling so passionately vitriolic towards it. And so I'm going to rip into this game and tell you why Xenoblade Chronicles X is my least favorite game of all time. Let's start with one of the least controversial things I'll be saying in this entire video. Oh my god, the story sucks! Okay, that's a huge generalization. The setup for the game's story is actually incredible. A war between two aliens takes place over Earth. Humanity makes a last-ditch effort to flee the planet as it's blown up. Pretty convenient timing there, actually. In their escape, one of the aliens from the war hunts them down and causes them to crash on a nearby planet. Now humanity has to make a new life for themselves on this planet called Mira, while also hunting down pieces of what's known as the Lifehold. Basically this thing that stores all of human knowledge, and is also everyone's life support. And they only have so much time to find it because it's using emergency power and will run out soon. But then also these aliens who shot them down are suddenly on the planet trying to exterminate them for mysterious reasons. When first hearing about this setup, my mind began racing with all kinds of ideas of what crazy shit was going to happen in this plot. Is there going to be some deep reasoning for why these aliens are so hell-bent on destroying humanity? Is there going to be some heavy themes of existentialism or how society can never come together? Oh, maybe there's some crazy plot twist in this game, like the first one, like the humans are the ones who destroyed their own planet are shifting the blame towards an outside force. I don't know. Even knowing this game wasn't going to be as story-focused as the original, I still had high hopes we'd get at least something thrilling or thought-provoking. And, we got something alright. The game starts out with your avatar. Yes, there's no core protagonist. You play as a silent avatar. I name my Malibu. Being released from a life pod by this woman named Elma. Your character has no memory of who or what they are, or even what happened, so Elma drags you around catching you up on everything, introducing you to the planet Mira in New Los Angeles, a pre-built city that all the survivors from the crash landing live in. It's here she brings you to Blade, basically the government/military that do everything to get humanity situated on the planet. There's also Lynn. I don't know how else to introduce her, she's just kind of there. After some fiddling around, you join Blade against your own will, and then are sent on a first mission to rescue some lost soldiers. It takes you to a base belonging to these aliens called the Prone. The soldiers are dead, but at least you rescue a Nopon named Tatsu. He fucking sucks. From then on, things just kinda happen. Story progression is done through story missions, and it really makes this plot feel disjointed. You learn that these aliens called the Ganglion, who are the ones who destroyed the Earth, have teamed up with the Prone and are trying to destroy the Lifehold. You save some other local aliens while also learning you're a robot. Yeah, Elma just kind of forgot to tell you that everyone's a robot and your actual bodies are on the Lifehold. Neat. Anyways, you find a cool mech, the Ganglion raid New LA and try to steal it from you. Marcus dies during the invasion. No! Not... Marcus! Who the fuck was Marcus? This Blade member named Lao starts acting kind of sus. You fight some furries. Then you fight one of the worst boss fights I've ever seen in a video game. Lao turns out to be an imposter and then gets pissed at the 1%. You then find the Lifehold, which was slightly offshore of one of the continents. How did they miss this? I'm literally right where we find the Lifehold. How did we miss this? You meet the head of the Ganglion there. I don't remember his name and don't care to look it up. He reveals that the reason they're trying to destroy humanity is because he thinks they might be related to these ancient powerful aliens and is scared of them. That's it. Lao comes to save you and drops the hardest line in gaming history.
Because of you, there's only 20 million of us left. That leaves 9.98 billion reasons for me to want you dead.
But falls into some DNA juice and becomes, that. You defeat him, Elma reveals she was an alien the entire time. Wait, what? Then after the credits, it turns out the Lifehold was destroyed the entire time, meaning your entire journey was pointless. And after that revelation, the game just ends on a cliffhanger that will never get resolved. And damn it, I'm getting Xenogears Episode 5 flashbacks all over again. And if that didn't sound disjointed enough, before each of these events, you have to spend a few hours running around, leveling up, and doing a bunch of affinity missions that don't relate to the overall plot but are required to progress for some reason. Then you can finally start a story mission. Oh, but first you need to watch the same unfunny joke about Lyn trying to cook Tatsu that totally didn't get old after they made that joke for the 200th time. Repeat that 12 times and that's Xenoblade Chronicles X. Simply put, I think this main plot is just bad. Aside from feeling disjointed, there's so many plot points that have either no payoff or just very half-baked ones. There's this really interesting mystery brought up about how all the species on Mira are able to understand each other. It's never resolved. What about Rise, I think her name was? She just kind of got mad at you and then disappeared. And then when they do have resolutions, they're so underwhelming, like Elma being an alien. This just gets revealed and doesn't really add anything aside from explaining a few random lines of dialogue. Now, to give the game some credit, a lot of the subtext or extra character development is done outside of story missions in either side quests or affinity missions. Side quests specifically, I think, do a great job at expanding the world and providing a ton of nuance and world building. Through side quests, a lot of new alien species come into New LA and integrate with each other's societies, and it's some really interesting stuff. A lot of the side quests do boil down to human racist to alien, and racism, but when you get to dive more into stuff like how the Prone teaming up with the Ganglion actually escalated a tribal dispute between the two types of Prone, and now one tribe has high-powered weapons and is using them to slaughter the other tribe, that's where my world-building stiffy goes wild. And it just sucks that this level of intrigue and world-building couldn't carry over to the main plot, and it's all just side activities. Affinity missions, on the other hand, get the biggest You Tried award of 2015. Like, they're okay. They try to give each party member a bit more depth, emphasis on try. Any development in these is so surface level, but even if it was great stuff, because of this game's structure, the character in question only gets to interact with the world in that affinity mission. Outside of it, they're just another unit used in battle. Speaking of interacting with the world, your avatar. Oh my god, making the avatar a silent protagonist was such a terrible idea. Your character has no bearing on anything within the plot. You're just an awkward piece of cardboard stitched to the scene, except for when the cutscene awkwardly pauses so you can pick between one of two dialogue options that doesn't really change anything. Silent protagonists are typically used to immerse yourself within a world, but ironically, it makes me feel less immersed in this case. So much of the plot hinges on the relationship between characters in this world, and with a silent protagonist, you yourself don't have any relationships with anyone. And when they try to have your avatar build relationships, it's so painfully awkward because only one side is showing any form of emotion. What's sad is, in an Iwata Asks interview, they mentioned that they had to rewrite a ton of the game halfway through because they decided a silent protagonist would be more fitting with the game's multiplayer aspects. And yeah, the rewrites really show. But hey, at least it's not as bad as Tatsu. Remember Ricky in Xenoblade Chronicles? What a Chad. He was a little goofy, but so lovable at the same time. The writers knew how to perfectly balance his comedy and surprising maturity within the story, and knew not to overuse him. Tatsu is the exact opposite. Tatsu is such a terrible character. He's written to be a more obnoxious and arrogant version of Ricky with no redeeming qualities. Every scene he's in, the writers only had one joke with Tatsu. Haha, food! There could be a serious scene where characters will be discussing how their will to live has deflated because the situation feels hopeless, but then Tatsu will butt in saying something about how great he is, and then Lyn says, "I'ma cook you," and the entire tone is absolutely thrown out the window. Tatsu being the obnoxious tone killer he is, combined with the cardboard avatar, just makes so much of this game's writing awkward. Now I should say, there is one aspect of the writing that really works, and that's Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is such a weird spike in writing quality that it almost makes me think this was completely unaltered from when the game was more story-driven. This chapter sees the party confront Lao to get back a data chip he stole, and my god, this is some Xeno quality storytelling here. Lao reveals that the only people who were allowed to board the ship that fled Earth were the rich and elite, or those who had skills that could be exploited, such as himself. He only joined the project to flee Earth in hopes to save his wife and daughter, but after learning they were never even given a chance to board the ship, he snapped. Then upon his defeat, Elma plans to just kill him for his betrayal, but Lyn steps in and stops her. Lao, seeing that there's still good in humanity despite everything, accepts defeat and hands over the data chip, and they leave him, with Lyn begging him to keep on living. Everything about this chapter just works. Lao's motive is heartbreaking and adds so many implications to the world that sadly aren't followed up on. Elma, Lyn, and even Tatsu, fucking Tatsu, have great moments that show their characters off really well. And they even got the humor right. Like, what the hell? This is the one part of the game where the writers realize they can make more jokes with Tatsu outside of cooking him, and it's actually pretty funny. This chapter doesn't feel like it's even part of the same game. It's easily the one highlight of this entire story. I just wish the rest of the Ryan could even hold a candle compared to Chapter 11, because if we had a game that was full of conflict this gray and character motives like this would be truly something special. But sadly, what we're left with is one bright spot in an otherwise poorly written game. With my bitching about the story out of the way, I think it's finally time we actually start talking about the gameplay of this video game. We are seriously 8 pages into this script, and I'm only just now getting to the gameplay. Jesus Christ. Actually, no. Before we get to that, I just need to explain a few things. For this video, I recorded my gameplay footage on Cemu for the sake of convenience and to be able to record gamepad footage. It's especially important to note this because you may notice how this footage looks extremely bright sometimes. Now, a normal person would immediately know that this isn't how the game is supposed to look and download the patch Cemu offers for the game to resolve this. But sir, I am a blind bitch and my photophobic ass just thought the game was always this bright. So I played and recorded the game like this for 10 hours. Then the game had a stroke and I realized, yeah, I should probably download that patch. So that's why some things look off. I'm pulling the blind card here. You can't blame me on this one. The emulation still wasn't perfect, however, like the Affinity map was having a time, and when inside the life hold, the background just decided to burn itself into the screen for some reason. Aside from those discrepancies, everything else was pretty normal, except for the fact that I did not play with any of the multiplayer functions and thus won't be covering them in this video. If you want to know my brief opinion on the multiplayer stuff, it sucks. It's half-baked and no one ever helped complete the monster tasks. But hey, you can get some OP gear for your mech and a shirtless statue of Hideo Kojima, so you know, it evens out. Okay, now we can talk about the gameplay. Xenoblade X sells itself on how massive a world the game has and how you can go anywhere at any time. As someone who loves open world games, this is super cool. When I was free to explore at my own leisure, I beelined it to Sylvalum because it was my favorite area in the game when I first played it. However, when I got there, I kind of forgot that while, yes, I can go to Sylvalum, the game's structure kind of made this completely pointless. I mean, first off, my level 9 ass couldn't kill a single enemy here, but the other major issue comes in with how you progress throughout the game. In order to make any progress in the game, you have to complete story missions. You access story missions by completing a list of crewmate tasks, which usually include reaching a certain level, completing some unrelated affinity mission, and exploring a certain percentage of a specific region. We'll get to those other things in a bit, but I want to focus on that percentage thing. X tracks your exploration of each region by having a survey rate. A region's survey rate goes up by doing just about anything. Finding landmarks, collecting items, defeating strong enemies, installing probes, and using field skills. Oh, I'll get to you two in a bit. Take Chapter 4, for example. In order to access this chapter, you need to have a 15% survey rate for specifically the continent of Primordia. This is obviously to push the player to keep to Primordia, since at this time in the game, Primordia is the most easily explorable because it has the most low-leveled enemies. I'm fine with that, but then what's the point in exploring other regions at the time if exploring them isn't going to progress anything? To save times for when other regions need survey requirements, I guess? But even then, it's such a high risk with no reward because A, the enemies are all too strong so you're constantly on the run, and B, you can't even do much of anything because of these little things called field skills. Oh, but more on those later. The whole explore anywhere you want whenever is just a dumb selling point that honestly makes each area's region design worse. To try and compensate for, say, if some idiot, like me, tries to go to Sylvalum early on, the developers put like 2 or 3 low-level enemies there for you to make you feel good about yourself. But that's really all that's there for you. And these weird-ass corners to try and compensate for those low-level people just become a burden when you come in at level 40 and you need to farm some of those enemies for certain items. Because, yes, Xenoblade X made low-level enemies obnoxious. More on that later. What makes the free exploration even worse is field skills. Field skills are stats that increase as your blade rank goes up that allow you to interact with different objects in the world. As you explore in the game, you'll come across something like a wrecked helicopter, and to interact with it, your mechanical level needs to be high enough. Or if you find a plant, your biology level needs to be high enough. This is garbage. I love exploring in games, and I can't tell you how many times I found a treasure tucked away somewhere, got excited about it, then got punched in the dick with a, your mechanical level isn't high enough for this. I got 0 reward for finding this treasure, and instead I have to come back at a later time. The placement of what level an object will be feels so random too. And leveling up each field skill takes forever as well, so you can't just quickly level up the stat you need and come back to the treasure you found. This ruins so much about exploration in this game for me. So, while the game claims to let you explore the world freely, it's artificially making a path for you, and it really takes the magic out of exploring. If I go outside the game's intended path, it feels like I'm cheating the game. And then they slap me in the face when I manage to sneak by enemies by saying I can't even collect the rewards I uncovered. And then they shoot me in the foot by saying you shouldn't explore here because it won't progress the game right now. I know it's not fair to compare this game to one of its successors, but I really think they should have gone with Xenoblade 3's method of open world design. That game funnels you through a path to make a smooth level curve for enemies and rewards, while having a lot of clearly defined side paths with higher leveled enemies that you can take if you want to take a shot at going through those areas and gain even better rewards. In concept, this is what X tries to do, but in a completely open world, it's so easy to accidentally stumble into a spot where the enemies are suddenly 30 levels higher, and then you get sniped by a fucking bird. The Xenoblade 3 approach does limit exploration a bit compared to how X does it, but it leads to a far better gameplay experience while still giving the player the feeling that they can explore the world how they want. Let's go back to the requirements to access story missions. I already explained why survey ratings are annoying. Requiring specific affinity missions to be completed beforehand isn't really an issue. Required party members? Oh no. Oh boy, we're getting to the juicy stuff. If I had to choose my absolute least favorite design choice in Xenoblade X, it's that you can play the game, but the runner-up is how party members are handled. Your party consists of 4 characters. Your avatar always needs to be in the party, but aside from that, you get to choose 3 other characters out of the wide pool of 18 party members. Oh, did I say 3? I meant to say 1, because unless you want to have a miserable time, you have to keep Elma and Lyn in your party. Elma and Lyn are required for every single story mission and a majority of affinity missions, but outside of those, you're going to want to keep them in your party because guess what? Party members don't gain EXP unless they're in your party. This decision absolutely ruins the game. Because of Elma and Lyn being required for just about everything, that means that you at all times have a shield trooper and a full metal jaguar on your team. We'll talk more about customization later, but your avatar can pick from any class in the game to be, and every other party member is just one of those classes. So already, there goes any incentive to make your character either of those 2 classes because it'd be redundant to have 2 of the same classes in your party unless you have a very specific strategy in mind. But it also limits which other party members you pick as your force since there's a ton of overlapping classes each party member is. Hell, in Lyn's case, there's just characters that are straight up better shield troopers than her, but I have to have Lyn in my party or else she's going to be way underleveled in the coming fights, which is going to make them impossible to beat. So there goes a lot of the freedom of choice this game loves to pretend it has. This also means you need to prioritize Elma, Lyn, and your own avatar when it comes to gear, leaving every other party member out to dry, as well as have them be a part of your party during side quests so that they gain the EXP. But this means that they absorb all the other affinity points that could be going to the 16 other party members. Because of this wonderful game design, your 4th party member is almost always dead weight because they're way underleveled and lacking in gear. Now, you could just pick one specific party member to be your go-to and keep them on you at all times, but this game just loves to ruin my dreams. My first time playing this game, you know who my go-to party member was? Lao. You lose Lao as a party member later in the game, meaning all the EXP he absorbed went to waste and I lost all the great gear I gave him. I was now going around with my level 35 main 3 while I had like HB or something chilling in the back at like level 20. This time, I knew not to invest time and energy into Lao, but it was still obnoxious. I decided to primarily stick with Doug at first because I like Doug. He's the kind of guy I'd have a beer with, you know? But I kept having to take him out for missions and had trouble finding him, so I ended up keeping Irina as my 4th because she was right outside the Blade Barracks. Regardless of what you do, though, that 4th party member is always going to be far lower leveled than the main 3, meaning most battles just turn into them getting one shot and then just being the first Xenoblade. You know how I said I stopped using Doug because I had trouble finding him? That's because Xenoblade X has one of the worst party management systems I have ever seen. You know how in any other game you'd have a little menu where you can easily swap out party members? Convenience goes against Xenoblade X's religion, and so it makes you have to physically track down each party member individually within New LA to talk to them to get them to join your party. New LA is huge, and especially before you get your scale, this is so obnoxious. They look like any other NPC standing there, and there's no easy way to track down their location outside of a vague general location on the world's worst map. But Zach, you might be saying, couldn't you just memorize everyone's locations? True, but the game somehow found a way to screw up even the shittiest game mechanic of all time. You know heart-to-hearts from the first Xenoblade game? Those little icons that you go to and activate a nice little conversation? Those are great. But apparently the developers thought floating icons were too unrealistic, so instead they have to have that party member leave their usual spot to go stand where the heart-to-heart takes place. So sometimes the party member you want just isn't there, and you have to go run around all of New LA and hope that you pick up some random gossip about the location of that heart-to-heart so it gets added to your map. So then you gotta rush over to that spot hoping that they're still there by the time you get to them because all these heart-to-hearts take place at certain times of the day, which wouldn't be a problem if Xenoblade X didn't just remove the ability to change time whenever you want for no apparent reason. You know what? I brought it up. We're gonna talk about all the quality of life this game has. Or lack thereof. One of the many reasons why I love the first Xenoblade so much is because of how much it cared about you. The amount of quality of life implementation in Xenoblade is crazy, and it makes the gameplay experience so smooth and fun throughout. Xenoblade X is like an abusive uncle. For some ungodly reason, this game removes a bunch of quality of life features from its predecessors that I just can't comprehend why they did. Being able to change the time of day in Xenoblade was so handy. It made quests easier and even just made the simple act of me wanting to listen to only Satoral Marsh Night while going through that area convenient. For no reason, X decides to keep that feature to specific areas. So yes, you can change the time of day, but you have to do it at these benches, these trailers, which there aren't very many of, so what's even the point of this? How about that handy arrow that helped you navigate Xenoblade's very layered world? X just says here's a vague direction, a weird ball, good luck. Now, I know to some this ball might be helpful as it shows you the path you should follow. However, my blind ass can barely see this ball as it speeds off, making it entirely useless for me. Or how about those useful maps in Xenoblade that easily explain how the layered terrain is set up? X just shows you a PNG and shrugs. Let's actually elaborate on that map, shall we? The original had a perfect map that heavily encouraged exploration. X being a game focused entirely on exploration, you'd expect it to have a map that encourages exploration too. Nope! The map is filled in as you install research probes. See, I told you we'd get back to these. Probes are installed by going to specific areas on the map and placing them. Once the probe is placed, all these hexagons around the one that the probe is in are filled in with more information. However, remember field skills? Installing probes is tied to field skills. Your research level needs to be a certain amount to install probes in various places. So you are literally locked out of getting information on your map unless you invest enough time and energy into raising your research level. And in a massive open world game, the map might just be a little important. Upgrading your research skill is the most important field skill to focus on, because without all these probes installed, your map is useless. Actually, even with the probes installed, it's pretty useless. But still, sections of the map are split up into these little hexagons, which the hexagons' purpose is to say what kind of stuff is in that specific region of the map. It could be telling you that there's a treasure there, or a unique monster, or that this is the location of a quest that you haven't even unlocked yet, so what's the point in saying it's on here? This sounds kind of useful, except no. The hexagons are something exclusive to the map. There is no way of distinguishing what area is within the hexagon unless you're directly looking at the map. So one hexagon says there's a treasure located in it. This causes me to be running around in circles, constantly looking at the map to see if I'm still in the hexagon, all in vain to find this stupid plant. What makes this worse is that sometimes the important thing contained in the hexagon is literally right on the border of the hexagon, making it even more impossible to track down. And if that wasn't bad enough, X's world is very layered. There are tons of caves, cliffs, holes, floating islands, whatever. The map has no way of communicating the layered nature of the world because the map is just an overhead PNG. Caves, for example, can be very twisty and confusing sometimes, and there's absolutely no map for these. Other places are bad too, like Noctilum, where trees cover the majority of the map, so it's even more useless than my appendix. And when the map is trying to show you where a quest location is at, oh god, it gets even more confusing because combined with the layering issues, you also can't really zoom in that well, which for my legally blind ass on this tiny Wii U gamepad screen is the absolute most miserable thing. You also might be noticing all this random junk on the map about mining and shit. That's the perfect segue into one of X's most infamous elements. Monolith Soft is such a respectable company. But Jesus Christ, they do not know how to make a tutorial. You can tell they try so hard with each Xenoblade game, but each one is a train wreck in their own special way when it comes to the tutorials. Xenoblade 1s are too simple, 2s straight up get information wrong, 3s treat you like you're a toddler. Though I gotta give X some credit, because they didn't fuck up its tutorial surprisingly. They just didn't put them in the game. Okay, there are tutorials, but wow, are these some of the most useless strings of text I've ever seen. Well, that is when you can see them, but I'll save that for later. They'll explain something like, this is how you use an art. But then they won't explain what the art does, or what the status inflict does, or how to recharge it, or anything. This is a common issue throughout the whole game. X has some really complex systems that the game doesn't even try to explain to the player. Take mining, for example. This is a very intricate mechanic where you can link data probes to retrieve materials or give yourself some boosts in certain areas. Understanding this is fundamental to doing things like upgrading skills, investing in companies, crafting weapons, but the game does not explain how that works. nor does it really explain those other things I just mentioned. You want to know how I learned how to do any of this stuff? Some random videos on Nintendo America's YouTube channel. I think even they knew how awful these tutorials were and did all they could to try to assist players. When you need to use external sources to understand game mechanics, that's terrible design. Part of me almost feels like the lack of explaining things was intentional because when you actually understand things, you can kind of snap this game in half. Like, especially when you figure out Overdrive, it's game over. Speaking of, let's get into that combat that this game doesn't explain. Okay, so I've been pretty negative so far, but even my burning hatred for this game can't stop me from saying the combat isn't the worst. I was able to write over a page of issues with the combat, but I'm not gonna lie, combat can be fun sometimes. Combat is structured fairly similarly to the original Xenoblade, which, if you don't know, has one of my favorite combat systems in any RPG. You got your list of arts at the bottom of the screen that fill up with time, positioning is really important, drawing aggro is the key to winning battles, breaking, toppling auras, those time button presses. It's all here with some new additions that are actually pretty cool. You can target various body parts of an enemy, which if you break that part, it affects their attacks or behavior. Not only do you have your melee weapon, but you're also a true American patriot who flexes their Second Amendment rights with a gun, and you can switch between the two weapons at any time. I really like that. Chain attacks are gone, but they're replaced with Overdrive. Okay, we'd be here for like 10 minutes if I tried to explain what Overdrive does and how it works, but it basically makes all your arts recharge faster and you do more damage as this number goes up for a select period of time. If you know what you're doing, it's busted. But it's very hard for me to take advantage of because it's color-based and I am completely colorblind, so I had to get instructions and art presets from other people on message boards back in the day to beat the harder bosses. Okay, positives. I like that each art can have a secondary chart to make the attacks more powerful. Okay, I've been positive for too long. Let's talk about TP. TP is something you accumulate throughout battle and can be used for various things. 3,000 TP will let you activate Overdrive, 1,000 will let you revive a fallen party member, some arts actually cost TP. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Nope. Your party members love to waste their TP. The moment they have a chance, they are going to use those arts that consume all their TP. This causes a lot of problems, like if your avatar dies. For some ungodly reason, the developers decide that if your avatar dies, the battle will end soon. This causes a massive chain of events. Firstly, since your party is always wasting their TP, when your avatar dies, it's usually game over because there's no way they'll gain enough TP in time. Hell, there's one time where my character died that Lynn just used a TP consuming art instead of reviving me. Thanks for that. So because of this, you need to A, keep very useful arts off your party members since they are too dumb to use them properly, and B, you need to set your avatar up so that they can survive. This means not playing a tank-based class and giving your avatar all the best equipment. It's very limiting and absolute garbage. You know what else is garbage? Enemy sightlines! X didn't do much right, but one thing that is really handy is that targeting an enemy shows if they're hostile or not and what makes them attack you. Whether it's sightlines, if you're in a scale or not, if you make a lot of noise, etc. This is pretty handy, but I swear to God, half the time it doesn't even matter because enemies will see you before you even see them. I've spent so much of my time playing this game just running away from enemies because half the time it's an enemy 15 levels higher than me that I have no chance of winning against. And the other half of the time, I just don't want to fight the enemy because EXP gains from enemies are ridiculously tiny. To this game's credit, they did lower the level cap of characters to 60 instead of 99 like in the first Xenoblade. But then there's a shit ton of enemies higher leveled than 60, so why'd they cap it here? I get super bosses, but some of these are just regular enemies hanging out in the overworld. It makes trying to 100% this game a pain in the ass because when your avatar caps their level, the only way they can now get stronger is through getting more powerful gear, which requires grinding an absurd number of enemies. Alright, I'm kind of going all over the place now. Let's focus back on something. Let's see, what haven't I bitched about? Skells. One of the prospects of X that made me the most excited about it was having a giant mech to freely explore around with. Flying in these things especially, God, it looked so exciting. And you know what? It actually kind of lived up to the hype. I know, I'm shocked too, but they really got some of the mech stuff right. To break down how the mechs, or as the game calls them, Skells, I kind of like the Japanese name Adol better, the way they work is that they are a rideable vehicle that you attach different body parts to that provide different arts to the Skell. Skells do more damage, but each art and flying around costs fuel, which you gain from the unexplained mining thing I talked about earlier. You got 3 types of Skells: smaller lightweight models that are faster, middle ground ones, and slower heavy ones that are just better in nearly every single way with just how much fuel they carry and their damage output. I honestly really like how much customization you get with Skells. Sure, Skells cost a shit ton of money, and buying parts for them is even more expensive, but there's so much you can do with them, and I love how they affect combat. They kind of take over on-foot combat, admittedly, but hey, watching them hover around enemies is so fun, so it's fine. You can even change the color of them too, which if I weren't colorblind, I'd be hyped about this. Exploring with them is fun too. It's a bit annoying how you get your Skell 35 hours into the game, but you can't get the flight module for another 10 or 15 hours, but once you get it, it's a blast. There's just so much to see while flying around, and some of the views are absolutely breathtaking. Their size makes some places kind of janky, like trying to attack a fort while in a Skell is a magical experience. Honestly, just goofing around with the Skell is probably the most fun I have with this game. Somewhat relevant, but I actually have a great memory associated with Skells as well. I was at PAX West 2015, back when it was called PAX Prime, and Nintendo had a booth set up for Xenoblade X. It was kind of a weird booth since it wasn't a demo, it was just some Nintendo of America employees showing the game off, but I was in my Xenoblade X hype boner phase, so I watched them demonstrate the game for like 30 minutes straight. After some time, one of the employees noticed I'd been sitting there and was like, hey, you've been watching for a while, you want to play for a bit? And so I got to play the game early, and they had me mess around with the Skell in Oblivia as they explained Skell mechanics for like 10 minutes. Honestly, one of my favorite experiences I've had at a con. Okay, happy time over, let's complain about Skells now. While I like a lot about Skells, they definitely aren't perfect. For one, smaller enemies are a pain in the ass. Half the time I accidentally step on one and it initiates a battle that I don't want to do. The other issue being that you can't target body parts of enemies, meaning fighting a Skell limits the types of items you get from defeating enemies, which in a game that requires a lot of grinding specific enemies is pretty annoying. I get this is supposed to incentivize you to use on-foot combat, but fuck you, I want to fly around in my big robot. Speaking of battles, there's one pretty annoying mechanic about Skells, and that's insurance. When your Skell gets defeated, you have to pay a huge repair bill. That is, unless you got some Allstate on that bitch, in which you don't have to pay for anything. This doesn't sound too bad. A bit unnecessary, but not bad. I'd agree if it weren't for the AI. I don't know what it is about the AI in this game, but they just love to get their Skells destroyed, which insurance only covers a few break-ins, and when you run out, it gets pricier to get more. And Skells already consume like 90% of your money, so having to constantly pay off your dumb AI's poor decision making is pretty annoying. These issues, while definitely annoying, don't ruin the fun Skells can provide. It just makes it feel like the game doesn't want me to use a Skell all the time, which I want to. Combat is more fun with them, customization is more interesting, and flying is an absolute joy that thank God doesn't have one of the most incredibly annoying things that makes me not want to fly anymore. Xenoblade games are well known for their incredible soundtracks, but often when talking about the music in the series, Xenoblade X is left out of the conversation. And you wanna know why that is? It's because this soundtrack is so much better than the others. Actually, it's probably because of the vocal songs, but we'll get to that. Xenoblade X has, without a doubt, one of my favorite soundtracks out of any game. Hiroyuki Sawano, the composer behind Kill la Kill, Seven Deadly Sins, Attack on Titan. He has such a distinct style to his work, combining electronic sounds with some of the most powerful orchestral instrumentation you've ever heard, and some of the stupidest names you've ever seen. I'm no music expert, but there's just something about any song composed by Sawano that hits different, and X follows suit. There are so many banger songs covering a wide range of genres. You've got powerful orchestral pieces that play during cutscenes like Codename Z, Theme X, Mono X, D91M, Z5M, 20I12R04A20. I changed my mind, I actually hate Sawano. The area themes each bring in their own unique style, with a special shout out to, I'm not saying that, which sounds so intense that I don't even think Sawano knew he was supposed to be composing an overworld theme for a jungle. And 46-Sylvalum Night, which I can't listen to without getting chills every single time. However, we gotta talk about the elephant in the room, the battle themes. A lot of people hate these because of their usage of some of the stupidest lyrics ever written. I'm not one of those people. Oh, I will fully acknowledge that the lyrics are hilariously bad. But A, I think it kind of adds to the charm. And B, for me, when I'm playing a game, I'm too focused on gameplay to really register what the lyrics are saying. They just kind of sound like another instrument to me, which especially in the heat of battle works perfectly for creating some of the most intense battle themes. Black Tar makes fighting even weak enemies feel like a boss fight. The Kiwi Lost, such a great final boss theme. And trailer theme. I will never understand that marketing decision. And God, Uncontrollable, when that polyphony fits. Oh, this shit is better than You Will Know Our Names. People also forget that not every battle theme has lyrics, like this keyboard smash. This is supposed to be for mini bosses. And of course, my favorite battle theme in the game, A Boris. A rearrangement of D91M, an already very emotional song that's made even more heartbreaking and powerful as you fight against Lao in Chapter 11. It perfectly captures the last stand of a broken man, furious at humanity for what they've done, and the turmoil you, the player, are in knowing that you have to stop him. This song is so good and I can't get enough of it. It's easily my most listened to song from the soundtrack. While we're at it, can we talk about how incredible the use of motifs and rearrangements are in this soundtrack? The motifs of Theme X starts off as this song that gives off this huge sense of hope, but then is later used to make songs feel so triumphant. And not only that, it's used in The Way, which is such a beautiful vocal song. Dude, I don't know how Sawano does this. Not all of them land, like In the Forest is something. I never thought Codename Z would get lyrics, but here we are. Oh, what am I talking about? This song is so dumb, I love it. There are like one or two songs that don't hit, but the vast majority of them are serious bangers. There are so many other songs I could go on about, but I'm really tired of trying to say shit like Kaku West, asterisk arrow triangle star star Kai. Point is, this soundtrack is amazing, and it's the one flawless part of this game. The climax of Codename Z plays during a loading screen. Jesus Christ, it's like they don't want me to like this game. Okay, look, I got a bitch. Because while the X in SEX stands for Xenoblade X's soundtrack, some of the ways they put the songs in the game are just really confusing. Like the cutscene that plays during the introduction to Primordia plays a remix of Noctilum's theme. I mean, I'm not complaining, this song slaps, but what? I joked about this a bit, but I kind of get the impression that there wasn't super good communication between the developers and Sawano. It just feels like he made a bunch of songs and they just placed them wherever they felt like it worked best. Like The Way. Sounds kind of emotional, right? So let's put it during emotional heart-to-hearts. Completely forgetting the song has lyrics, thus creating a jumbled mess of audio. It definitely shines during cutscenes where you can really tell most of them were not synced to the music at all. Codename Z's chorus plays during a loading screen. I will never get over that. And before you say, well, actually, there's two choruses to the song. The first one plays while we watch characters mourn the death of the most important character, Marcus. Sometimes it works, like, big surprise, Chapter 11. The use of D91M during Lao's speech is gorgeous, especially when that climax hits. But then D91M is also used when Elma explains that you're a robot, and that climax plays during a load. Can you see why I hate this game? Oh, but at least you get to hear the music. Sometimes too well, the default audio mixing in cutscenes is not great. But you know all those incredible battle themes I mentioned? Wouldn't it be a shame if a peppy German pop song interrupted all of them? Poor Fleeton plays every single time you enter Overdrive. You know, a core mechanic of the battle system, which, you know what? It's a great song, but damn it, when I'm having an emotionally charged battle with a man who's lost all hope in humanity, it really kills the mood when suddenly funny German music go brr. And the song restarts every time you re-enter Overdrive, so you keep hearing the same 5 notes over and over again, often in the same battle. All these complaints aside, I gotta give Xenoblade X some credit. I've never seen a game have a feature where you can listen to the worst song in the game by pressing the R button. I don't know if my hatred towards Don't Worry is because it's one of the fabled bad songs in the soundtrack, or because after my first 250 hours of playing this game, I was so tired of hearing it. It starts playing every time you take flight in your Skell, which if you haven't played the game before, you know that once you unlock that flight module, you're almost always flying. Say goodbye to those great overworld themes because all you're ever hearing now is what's even more quirky? I don't even remember what the song sounds like past the minute mark, because when you land for even a second, the song stops. Which might sound like a blessing, but the moment you hit that R button again, the song restarts and it's back to... And I said hit the R button, because even if you just want to jump, once you unlock the flight module, the simple act of jumping in a Skell causes the song to start. This issue is so genuinely aggravating that one of the only cheats I used for this playthrough was the turn off flight music cheat. It seriously makes the game so much better. Flying through Sylvalum at night listening to its nighttime theme is a magical experience. And it's such a shame that you don't get to experience that because some developer just really had a hard on for this song. These might seem like petty things to complain about, and they are, but when the soundtrack is so good that I go out of my way to purchase a copy of it, it's frustrating that not as much care went into putting the songs in the game as there was into making them. A lot of my issues were most likely oversights, like the developers maybe didn't realize how often Overdrive would be used, or the dev kits had faster loading so they didn't realize how some cutscenes didn't work well. I don't have an excuse for the Don't Worry thing. These issues don't detract from the OST being the masterpiece it is, and I highly recommend everyone give it a listen. A lot of people just wrote it off as bad because haha, bigger gun, but trust me, it's worth a listen. But not only is the OST a masterpiece, but it's also doing a blessing for humanity. It's why this game isn't getting ported to the Switch. Okay, this isn't relevant to why X is worse than Pneumonia, but I've wanted to talk about this theory I've had for a while, and I've never really had a place to talk about it. Based off of what Monolith has said about a Switch port and the research I've done, I feel fairly confident that they can't port the game to the Switch because of the soundtrack. So first off, there are a lot of vocal songs in this soundtrack, much of them sung by different artists. Going off the credits and looking at the pamphlet and the soundtrack, it seems like a lot of these artists involved in the songs have different record labels, which means getting authorization to use all the songs in a game again would be a total train wreck. This is also probably why there's absolutely no Xenoblade X music in Smash Ultimate. Then there's Sawano himself. Xenoblade X started development in 2010, which if I had to guess, means Sawano was probably hired onto the project in 2011, most likely due to his involvement with Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn the year before. Thing is, this is right when Sawano started to gain popularity in the industry. He especially became popular in 2013 because of his work on this niche little series called Attack on Titan. By the time the game released in 2015, Sawano went from a pretty unheard of composer to a titan of the industry. I just realized I wrote that pun. That was not intentional. And then the year the Switch came out, Sawano made a couple of big changes, like changing agents and working with Sony. By the time Monolith Soft could even consider a Switch port, Sawano was probably way out of their reach. TLDR, too expensive, and Sawano was too Chadley. Again, this is completely just my own conjecture. I could be completely off, but I just like to think the OST is doing God's work of protecting people from being subjected to Xenoblade X, and that just makes me love it even more. Okay, enough saying nice things, let's go back to shitting on this game. Okay, I've mentioned the areas you explore in the game a ton, but I haven't really stopped and talked about them individually. And that's honestly because I wanted to get most of my bitching out of the way before I talk about the problems I have with each area. There are 6 major areas to explore in the game: Primordia, Noctilum, Oblivia, Sylvalum, Cauldros, and your home base of New LA. Now, before release, they claimed that this game's world is 5 times larger than Skyrim, which had me so excited. These continents must be huge with so much to see on each one. What they failed to tell you is that much like the human body, 70% of this world is water. So realistically, this game's map is only a bit larger than that of the original Xenoblade. But the fact it's all open world is pretty cool, and some of the continents flow really naturally into one another, making the world feel seamless. Emphasis on some. Okay, let's break down each one, shall we? Primordia is your average grassy area that every Xenoblade game has a take on. Honestly, of all the continents, I think this one is the best designed. It all comes down to variety and reward. This being the first area in the game, they didn't want to bombard you with too high of field skill levels, so almost everywhere you go, you'll get some kind of reward that you can actually obtain. There's also just a lot of cool sights to see, and your exploration is often rewarded with gorgeous views. It's solid. I like it. Also really enjoy how this is by far the continent that evolves the most as you play. This little structure is being built and a whole questline about trying to make a water treatment plant. I love this kind of stuff. If I do have to complain though, it'd be that some of the enemies here have obnoxious sightlines, especially the high leveled ones. I remember when the game first came out, I saw so many people on message boards talking about this, and they dropped the game because of it. This is an issue with all the areas for the record, but it feels the most noticeable here. Overall though, it's probably my favorite area in the game. Oblivia is the quintessential Xenoblade X map, in that it's so close to being great but just has so much garbage in all that greatness that ruins the whole place. I'll start by saying the north part of the map, solid. Love these narrow paths, the oasis is really cool, these floating islands are kind of nifty. Too bad that's only like 25% of the map. The rest of Oblivia is so boring and dead. Like, I get it, it's a desert area. But you could have at least tried to make it more than just flat emptiness, and sometimes just straight up emptiness. Even the giant ring, which looks so cool off in the distance, is so boring when you get close to it. In the lead up to this game, that ring was one of my most hyped places to check out. And in typical Xenoblade X fashion, I was horribly disappointed. And this place also highlights just how bad the map and field skill issues are. Of every instance I can think of not having a high enough field skill rating, half of them were in Oblivia, I swear to God. And so many of these treasures are right on the edges of hexes, making it so hard to pinpoint where they are. This place sucks. Moving on. Noctilum sucks too. This is the most weirdly segmented of the continents. You got the first part where it's covered in trees and is super confusing to navigate, especially since the map is so useless here with all the giant leaves covering everything. Then it does this weird narrow path thing which brings you to a slightly junglier looking version of Primordia. And then there's a massive wall that you have to fly to get up to that's just a lake with some ridiculously strong enemies. I wish everything flowed here better, because aesthetically I do really like this place, and god, the daytime music. It's a crime against humanity that you can't change the time on a whim, because I would only play here in the day if I could. I don't know, outside of aesthetics, it's too segmented and uninteresting when you break it down for me to love it. Feels like a D-tier Xenoblade 1 map, honestly. Sylvalum. Remember how I said I dislike this game even more? Yeah, Sylvalum is probably the biggest contributor to that, because I used to say all the time that Xenoblade X sucks, but at least Sylvalum was great. Yeah, I think I was just blinded by how pretty this place was, which, yeah, it's still gorgeous. It's so unique and mesmerizing, and god, I would play a whole game in an area like this. Well, if it was actually designed well. Sylvalum is a bowl. That is the best way to describe it. The entire center of the map is just full of enemy soup with nothing interesting going on. All the points of interest are along the edges of the map, and it makes exploring so boring since you're just hugging the edge looking for the next point of interest, which 9 times out of 10 is just a cave. Caves suck in this game because you don't have a map, your character moves too fast, and your skells usually can't come in. So many collectibles are just on these stone things too, and it's so repetitive checking every single one to see if there's items on them. The only interesting thing to see here are these giant balls in the sky. I don't know, they're just kind of pretty. Every mission sucks here too. All the worst story missions take place here, and then Chapter 10 causes this giant mech to consume a good portion of the map. And while I complimented Primordia for updating the map as you go on, it has the Oblivia ring problem, and then that this hunk of metal takes up so much space and has nothing interesting to find on it. Like, at least the Oblivia ring had some items to find on it. This is just nothing. Then, with the worst transition I've ever seen between two areas, like seriously, they didn't even try here, Cauldros! Yeah, I don't like Cauldros all that much, but weirdly it's probably up there with Primordia as one of the better designed areas in the game. Cauldros is great at keeping variety and points of interest going. A lot of collectibles are cleverly hidden, all these floating bases are cool to check out, and some of the creatures here are just cool to look at. Creatures are where I have a problem with Cauldros, though. There's just too many enemies, man. Whether flying or on the ground, there's just so many hostile monsters, and it makes exploring a pain. Now, I get it's supposed to be where the alien strongholds are. That makes sense. But you can't go 5 feet without triggering a battle, I swear to God, especially with how crazy enemy sightlines can be. It just takes all the fun out of exploring, which if you couldn't tell, is my favorite thing about this godforsaken game. Though, yeah, Cauldros is actually decent. It's hilarious I'm saying this though, because I used to hate Cauldros the most. But I don't know. I can respect something from a design perspective, even though I don't personally enjoy it. I don't know, maybe it's the hellish theming too. I have a soft spot for that because of my Capstone game. Go play Hell of a Racket, it's free on Steam. Oh, but I've saved the best for last. And by best, I mean worst. New LA has got to be one of the worst hub areas I have ever seen. I genuinely hate this place. It highlights every single problem with Xenoblade X and creates its own problems too. I mean, it's literally home to the bullshit party mechanic. That's already not doing it any favors, but there's other shit too. A lot of it is so samey looking, making it visually boring and cumbersome to get around. The hangar area is layered, meaning the map is absolute garbage, and even worse here since with the map icons, you can't tell which layer of the hangar something is on. There's all these dead ends, and if you fall off, you have to slowly swim back to the few ladders that take you back up. Don't know why they couldn't just make this solid ground here. There's only like 2 missions that even take you down here. What was the point of it? There's also this garbage mechanic about hearing gossip. In order to get information on your map, you have to physically walk around New LA and pass by NPCs to hear them mention things that might add something to your map. You can't do this in a scale. You have to walk around. And New LA isn't tiny either. So I've spent so many hours of my life wasting my time just running around praying some random NPC will give me a location of a party member or a new quest. At least in a scale you can run over people. That's fun. And speaking of aimlessly walking around New LA, don't even get me started about that robotic scorpion side quest. I think that took 10 years off my lifespan trying to find all those fuckers the first time around. I've been pretty hard on these areas, but when you boil it down, they're still admittedly kind of fun to run around no matter what. And the visual and spectacle of flying around these interconnected continents is still something crazy to see. They just suck when you get down to the nitty gritty. But hey, at least they aren't as bad as the UI. Whew, okay. Here's a fun fact for you. My expertise in game development is in UI and UX. I have loved user interfaces since before I even knew what the hell a UI was. As a kid, when coming up with video game ideas, I'd draw the UI and wireframes for menus because I just thought that was fun to do. And when I started writing the script, I was actually taking a class specifically on UI design. I gave a 7-minute presentation about everything wrong with this battle UI. The UI in this game is garbage. Okay, now at a glance, it might not look that bad, but that's just because the text is so small you can't see it. This absolutely fuels my blind rage, but it's not even just me being blind that's the problem here. I've heard plenty of other people complain about this too. Everything is so tiny that you really have to squint to even read dialogue or other important information. I genuinely don't know why they made it this way when this is a game on the Wii U. It's almost impossible to read anything on the gamepad when you play in handheld mode, so it makes that feature completely useless. It doesn't help that these menus and pop-ups are so damn cluttered. Like, look at this! What am I supposed to comprehend here? Where is my eye supposed to be drawn to? Every menu is like this. They just cram everything together and present way too much information at the player at one time. So much of it isn't really relevant too. Like, I don't need to know what region this intel is from when the only way I was able to access it was by selecting the region's intel. That's another issue with this UI. It's also layered. You have to go through at least 3 menus to get to anything useful. Like, let's say I want to access Elma's gear. I gotta select party, then scroll down to gear, then scroll down to Elma. Then I get to see her gear. Even something as simple as the settings falls victim to this. You see settings in the menu, you select it expecting to be taken to the settings menu, but nope, you're in another menu that has settings, switch screens, and return to title screen. Dog, those aren't settings. Don't even get me started on the enemy decks. The entire main menu, as the game calls it, is so weirdly organized. Like, why is the digital manual one of the top layer options, yet something useful like the return to stealth function is— oh god, my cat just clawed me. Yet something useful like the return to scale function is buried at the bottom of the party menu. Affinity Map has more to do with party than return to scale, but it gets top billing. And thanks for showing me my playtime front and center. I do not need to be constantly reminded that I've wasted over 300 hours of my life on this game. Now, let's talk about the battle UI. It's gross. There is just way too much useless junk here. A good HUD easily communicates all the relevant information to the player in a concise way. Xenoblade X puts your health bar on the screen twice. There's just so many useless bars and other garbage shown to the player that it's not really important when in the heat of battle. Never in the middle of a fight have I worried about what rank my class is. But I have been worried about what the name of my weapon is. Thank God they put that there. And all this gets worse when you're in multiplayer. I get that the battle system has a lot of complexities, but there's better ways to display all the necessary information to the player. Like this! This was an assignment for that UI class I talked about where the goal was to improve a game's UI. I took out a lot of useless information like class rank and the second health and TP bar. I made everything way bigger so it's easier to read. And I also added a couple of quality of life features like a more noticeable icon when your second chargement attack is ready, and a little blurb to state what part of the enemy you're attacking. And then just because I'm a slut for accessibility, I also added a little feed of what your party members are doing to make the game more accessible to deaf people, since there's no way to know what your party is doing outside of audio cues. I did this whole assignment in 20 minutes. A lot of this shit is not hard to fix. There's much simpler ways to show all this information. Every other Xenoblade game did it just fine. The map, Man, I don't even know. It's all the same issue. This UI just makes me depressed, and I know I'm not alone in that opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's the Accessibility Sideshow! Look, gaming accessibility is my shit. I love talking about it. It's what got me into game development in the first place, and telling developers that their games are inaccessible is literally my job. So I'm pretty qualified to talk about this stuff, and it gives me more chances to bitch about Xenoblade X. So I've already said a lot of the issues that impacted me personally as a visually impaired gamer. The tiny UI makes things impossible to see, Overdrive requires the ability to see color to use properly, the directional orb is mean, the gamepad makes me cry, but that isn't the end of my blindness issues. There's more color-based mechanics like seeing how strong an enemy is. Some of the areas during the day are huge strains on my photophobic eyes, and the brightness slider only helps so much. Treasures blend into the environment a lot. Overall, I would not recommend this game to any of my blind homies out there. If you think that's bad, people with motor skill issues are even more of a disadvantage. For starters, you have to use the Wii U gamepad. That's already enough of a red flag, but there's also no customizable controls. You have to play the game with the default controls, with some actions requiring holding multiple buttons at once. Using field skills requires button mashing. Soul voices are done using timed button presses to get faster and faster as the battle progresses. There's no winning here if you have limited mobility. I've mentioned how battle cues are only given verbally by characters, but another accessibility hurdle for those with hearing issues is the lack of volume sliders. This is such a weird omission because while accessibility options have really only been a thing for the past 5 years, volume sliders have been around for decades and a staple in most games. Really could have been useful here, especially with how bad the audio mixing can be. It's not all bad on the accessibility front though. Whoever was in charge of the camera settings was clearly on a whole other level. If you lose several times to a boss fight, the game provides an option to reduce the level to make it easier. Would have preferred if this was an option you could have on at all times, but hey, the thought was there. And I made fun of the electronic manual earlier, but it's actually a pretty decent tool if you need refreshers on certain things. There are some other tiny things I could nitpick, but those are the main things I wanted to address. This was a game released before developers knew what the word accessibility meant, plus it's a Nintendo game. I think those guys are allergic to accessibility options. I can't judge the game too much for not taking these things into consideration. I just like doing this stuff even to my favorite games, sue me. Okay, I've covered the big topics in this game, but there's still a lot of other issues I have, so let's do a lightning round of smaller petty issues. You are locked into affinity missions once you start them. That might not sound bad, but the words "get a blue electrical tentacle from Placid Dual Gills or others in Primordia" will bring back horrible memories for anyone who's played this game. Graphically, the game looks pretty good, but I hate the way characters look. They tried to blend anime and realism, and it just comes across as weird. Lynn's eyes stare into your soul. Most of the boss fights in this game suck. They take way too long, and most of them feel like nothing is really happening. And the Chapter 10 boss is genuinely one of the worst fights I've ever experienced in an RPG. The boss is moving across the sky as you fight it, and as it attacks you, it knocks you back. In a game where positioning is very important to what moves you're using, this is so frustrating, man. Speaking of bosses, the final boss blows. It randomly drains all your fuel, so you can't use your skills for the fight, which is so obnoxious and screwed me over my first time playing because I used my skills to make up for the fact that my fourth party member was severely underleveled. If you're not online, the game has to constantly remind you of that by showing the word offline in the top left corner of the screen at all times. And there's no way to remove this, so now that the servers are shut down, this will forever be burned into the game's HUD. I hate how little the world, specifically New LA, evolves as the game progresses. More NPCs show up as you do quests, and there's a few tiny environmental changes, but it's so minuscule. New LA looks incomplete, and with the themes of creating a new life, they should have evolved the main city more to showcase this. Like some Colony 6 type stuff would have been amazing here. When swapping party members, you put the member you want off the party in a column labeled Reserve Members. Now, you'd think that'd put them in reserve so you can easily swap them back in, but no, it just sends them back to their location in New LA. I think reserve might have been the wrong word to use here. There's a reference to Xenoblade X in Danganronpa V3. It's not really a problem with the game, it's just something that keeps me up at night. The Blade Barracks sucks. It's your home base, but it's way too small for how quick your characters move. It's also for some reason the only place where you can customize your skills. This really couldn't have been an option in the Skill Gear menu. The fact that the original Japanese version allowed you to put Lynn, a 13-year-old, in sexually explicit outfits. Shout out to Nintendo of America for fixing that, and anti-shout out to all the weird people online who got mad at Nintendo for censorship. Nintendo did remove the boob slider though, and that's just unforgivable. You can access the settings menu from the title screen, but for some reason you can't adjust the camera options until you load into the game. I'm a UI designer and I don't even have an explanation for that. Speaking of the title screen, you can't access playing on the gamepad from there. You have to actively be in the game. So if you want to just pick up the gamepad and play it, you have to turn on the TV to navigate past the title screen and then turn it back off. Look, I wouldn't wish playing this game solely on the gamepad upon my worst enemy, but that's still a bizarre oversight. The status menu is one of the most hilariously pointless things I've ever seen. When you enter the menu, it makes you select a character first, and when you hover over them, you see their stats in the bottom right corner. You press the A button and are taken to the stats screen, which shows you the exact same information. For this being a game about exploration, there's weirdly not that many landmarks to discover. I don't have hard numbers, but it feels like there's so few compared to every other Xenoblade game. Not really the game's fault here, but the way they distributed the soundtrack on the North American Special Edition was just awful. They put a small selection of songs on this admittedly cool looking flash drive. It even glows. Well, mine doesn't because it broke. The issue here is that the song files on the drive have DRM to stop you from copying them. Now that sounds bad enough, but I've seen multiple people online report how the DRM is buggy and can mess up your computer. Maybe it's a good thing that mine broke. But I've saved my biggest issue with the game for last. The very thing I hate most about Xenoblade Chronicles X is that it's not a bad game. When you think of the worst game of all time, what comes to mind? Probably something fundamentally broken. A game so full of bugs that it's nearly unplayable. Frustrating physics that make even the process of moving feel like a chore. A game so unfun that you'd rather be pulling your teeth out. Xenoblade X isn't that. It's a well put together game that clearly had a lot of love and attention put into it. You can tell from interviews that the directors of the game were clearly very excited about this project. I want to circle back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of this video. There was a part of the story that I omitted. After asking me why it was my least favorite game of all time, the Crackdown 3 developer asked me, what would make this someone's favorite game of all time? And the answers were right there in the issues I complained about. Some people maybe love how the story is handled. The structure of missions makes it almost feel like a TV show, where each mission is an easily digestible short story that lets characters all have their specific moments to shine. Maybe some players like the field skill system, as it encourages retreading old ground that may help you find more new items. Maybe people like the more grindy nature of the game, and party members not gaining EXP outside of battle just lets the players see continual growth in characters as they grind for important items. Maybe some players like the less quality of life features. I mean, Souls-like games are notorious for this, and people love them. Some people maybe just really like Don't Worry and think it doesn't play enough in the game. What I'm getting at here is, everyone has things they like, but not everyone likes the exact same thing. I don't like Xenoblade Chronicles X. It has a lot of design choices that I don't like, and it makes it an overall unenjoyable experience for me. But that doesn't make it a bad game. Clearly a lot of people enjoyed this game, and instead of scoffing at how people could even possibly enjoy this mess of a game, I've learned to accept how this just isn't the game for me. From a game designer's perspective, I think that's what the Crackdown 3 developers were getting at. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's inherently bad. In game development, you're not always going to be making something you love. A lot of times you're going to be working on a title that isn't really your cup of tea, and instead of trying to contort what you're making into something you'd personally love, you need to think of what the target audience would want. And there lies the problem with Xenoblade Chronicles X. It's called Xenoblade Chronicles X. Based off the title and the way the game presents itself at first, I went in expecting it to be Xenoblade meets Skyrim. But it turned out to be more Monster Hunter meets World of Warcraft. I love Xenoblade, but I'm not a big Monster Hunter or WoW guy. Does that even make sense to anyone? This game is conceptually something I love, but the execution is frankly something I'm not a fan of. But because on the onset this is the exact type of game I've dreamed about, it's so frustrating for me that this isn't the game that I want. But the game I wish Xenoblade X to be is out there actually. And it's called Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana. My grandma got me this game for my birthday, and I have nightmares about how she pronounced that title as a GameStop employee. Ys 8 is conceptually very similar to Xenoblade X. It's about a group of survivors crashing on a remote island, trying to build up a home base to survive while fighting against monsters trying to destroy them for unknown reasons. Exploring the island is how you progress. It's got RPG mechanics, tons of side content. Really all it's missing are mechs and Tetsuya Takahashi's name attached to it. While conceptually similar though, The difference is in the details. Ys 8 is less grindy and progression is far more based around exploration. The map is pseudo-open world where areas are interconnected but they funnel you down a semi-linear path, pretty similar to how Xenoblade 3 does it actually. The story is more engaging, it's about trying to uncover the mystery of what the hell the title means. It's got RPG mechanics, but combat is more hack and slash than action RPG, and has a great kinetic flow to it. Ys 8 is everything I love about video games wrapped up in a nice package. But as I've said, I see this game as a masterpiece because this is what I personally love. Someone can prefer X's approach to a similar concept, and that's okay. Some people may point to my disdain towards this game as a result of me overhyping it back in the day. But you wanna know something funny? Remember how nearly an hour ago I said how when I first played the game, I loved it at first, but as I kept progressing it got worse and worse? The exact same thing happened on this playthrough. And I was going into it expecting the absolute worst. The game was a ton of fun for the first 5 or so chapters, and after getting Kubler-Rossed again, that's when it hit me. I don't like Xenoblade Chronicles X because it's a game made up of things I love, done in ways I hate. So much game criticism isn't about objectivity, it's subjective. While some of the issues I brought up with X are genuine problems, like the UI being too small, the awful tutorials, the issues with the map, and how to swap party members, like, these are things not even the most diehard Xenoblade X fan will defend. Everything else, though, I can see why someone would enjoy these things or how they can look past them. Hell, I'm so close to enjoying so many aspects about this game, but I just can't due to my own preferences, and it's frustrating. I can see the quality this game offers. It starts out with so much promise. I want to love this game. That's why I feel so passionately about it that I can make an over 15,000 word video essay on it. Just because I dislike this game, though, doesn't mean you should too. I've made a lot of jokes about how this game is the worst thing since the Irish Potato Famine, but the last thing I want from this video is for someone to come out of it saying, wow, I didn't realize how terrible Xenoblade X was. No. Play the game for yourself and come to your own conclusions, because that's how we should treat all games. Games are going to resonate with people in different ways, and you're allowed to feel any way you want about a game. It's funny, for how much I dislike this game and how much sheer disappointment it brought me, Xenoblade Chronicles X is a very important game to me because it taught me all this. I went into this video wanting to make a hate piece about the game titled something like Xenoblade X sucks and here's why, and hoped it would start a chain reaction of people realizing this game was never good in the first place. But as I've been chipping away at this script, I've realized it's not that the game sucks, it's that I want something different out of my games. I feel like closely analyzing this game has made me not only grow as a game developer, but also as a person. So, thank you, Xenoblade Chronicles X. You did at least one thing right in my eyes. I'm never touching this fucking game ever again, though.